Hey, so I'm currently working on an arrangement of AJR's Bang, and I just wanted to kind of show you a behind the scenes about my process, what I do, how I arrange in general, and then more specifics for this particular piece. So let's go. So one of the first things you got to do is figure out what your arrangement is going to be, who it's for, what kind of instruments and things like that. So this particular song I felt worked really well as a string arrangement. So I wanted to do that. And this level of this piece is about a middle school, maybe lower high school type of piece. So you want to keep that in mind in terms of what kind of players you're going to have and what kind of abilities they're going to have. So the first thing that I did with this piece, because it's actually in the original key is a C sharp minor or D flat minor, however you want to say it, which is kind of a difficult and kind of unnecessarily hard key for strings to play in. So what I did is I moved it up to D minor. So much easier to play. It's only a half step difference. It's going to be much less intimidating for like middle school or high school orchestra to be looking at. So that's something to keep in mind. So that was the first thing that I did. And then generally what I'll do after that is kind of go through the piece, just make sure I have the whole structure set up. I kind of know where my A to B is, and I know, what my roadmap is going to look like, where I'm going to start, where I'm going to end, and things like that. So once I have everything set out, then I'll kind of go back and decide what I'm going to do, where I'm going to make changes to it, if I'm going to make changes to it. Sometimes you want to do a faithful arrangement of something. You just want to make it for a particular type of instrument. That's fine. Then you're just going to leave it as is. Sometimes you're going to kind of put your own spin on it. So that's something I like to do. Generally what I'll do is I'll keep the beginning of it pretty much the same, and then towards the end, towards the bridge, maybe the last verse, either change the key or change some aspect of it to make it a little bit more interesting and fun. So with this piece, I started off relatively close to the original. I have a little bit of an intro, and then it just kind of goes into the first verse, which I give to the violin. So we'll just take a listen. So one of the things that I like to do is kind of spreading the wealth, if you will, and giving each instrument kind of a chance to do something. So I'll toss the melody around. You heard, I'll give it to the violins, the cellos, the violas. Generally, the only instrumentation, at least for strings, that I kind of steer away from giving the melody to is the basses. I am a bass player, so it's not anything against them. It's just generally as a section, they're a little bit muddier. The higher you go towards professional, the better they're going to be able to play, but middle school, high school kids are not necessarily going to be able to play as well. So it's just going to be a real muddy sound. I'm not saying you can't do it ever. You just want to keep it in mind, depending on where in the piece it's going to lie, what kind of sound you're going to get out of it. What I'll do a lot, especially with strings, is I'll kind of vary how they play. So strings can play lots of different articulations, just like any other instrument. So they can bow it, which would be called arco, or they can pluck it, which would be called pizzicato. So I like to throw that in. So like, for example, I have the one section here that goes into pizzicato after arco. So we'll just start a little bit back. So I'll start out here, and you'll see. Any sort of instrumentation, but especially with strings, going back and forth between the two is a great idea just to make it more fun. Plus, it is a completely different texture, so it's a great orchestrating technique as well. Pizzicato is almost always much quieter than the arco, and it's a short, staccato sound, so it changes everything. Like I said before, sometimes what I like to do is just add like a little bit of my own, because my feeling is I'm making an arrangement, so I'm gonna kind of put my own twist on it. So sometimes I'll do a key change or like a different technique. I made one arrangement where they play pizzicato and straight rhythms at the end as opposed to swinging it for the whole rest of the piece. So just kind of a change. In this particular one, I do a key change, just a couple things like that, and here's what it sounds like. So one technique for strings is actually double the violin sound in places where you want a bigger sound. So you'll have the second violins play somewhere, usually like in the staff, and then the first violin's doubling that an octave higher. And that just creates some more depth. And then you can play with the other voices, depending on how big of a sound you want. But that really kind of gives a big, strong sound to the section. So with strings, you actually have a lot of space to work with. You have a wide range, so the basses are down here. You can't even see it on the camera, but this is the octave that they live in most of the time. And then the cellos are usually live around the octave above that, so this range. And then the violas kind of crisscross in that section too, but generally around here. Around here or so. And then you got the violins, which can go pretty much about here. And this is kind of the octave that they live in too. So you have basically this whole section here. Right, which is a lot of space. And you're only talking about 5 voices most of the time for an orchestral thing. So, I mean, you can mix and match all kinds of different ways that you want to with all that space. So what I like to do sometimes is give the lower instruments the melody. So the cellos or the violas. Like I said before, I kind of steer away from the basses. But that gives you a way to kind of change your orchestration around, give the violin some harmonies and things like that, some higher notes. But also it gives the other players a chance to play the melody. And you can do all kinds of cool things with that. You take instruments in and out. It creates a different kind of depth. So like in this piece, for example, I take the bass out at one point and I put the cello in a lower octave. Now the cello is going to have a crispier sound than the bass does. So it's going to create a different type of sound. And then later when the bass comes back, it makes it all much more effective because you've been listening to it at a higher register for a little while. A nice advantage of strings as opposed to some other instruments is they don't have to breathe, and which is great because you don't ever have to worry about air. And with the bows, they can pretty much go forever. So you don't have to worry about giving them too much to do. And violin players love playing, so there's never going to be a complaint that they're playing too much, which is good to keep in mind. That being said, sometimes it's nice to give the other instruments something to do. But again, you can make long phrases and things like that because they don't have to worry about breathing, which is great. So once I have the whole roadmap worked out, it's just a matter of going back and kind of working out the details, fixing the bowings, the breaths, if applicable, depending on the ensemble, and then kind of all those little details like that. And then just fix any overall problems. If there's a section that I am having a hard time transitioning to, or something just doesn't sound right, you kind of go back and make all those changes. So just overall, you want to keep in mind who you're writing for, whether it's professionals or kids in school or anything like that, because there is going to be a huge difference in what they can and can't do. And that really is important to kind of figure out at the beginning because that is going to determine kind of what happens throughout the whole rest of the process. So yeah, that's basically the process in a nutshell. Obviously, everything is slightly different, but that's essentially what I do, kind of my thought process, how I do things with my arrangement. So if you enjoyed this, make sure to like and subscribe, share this with all your friends. Check out this arrangement. It's up for sale along with a lot of my other ones as well, which I used a kind of similar process for. So thanks for tuning in.